Eagles went live on the goal line today in offense versus defense. John McMullen was there to take a look at it all. We've got the latest on day 7 of Eagles training camp as our training camp updates continue here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline with John McMullen on 97.3 ESPN. Johnny Mac, what's happening, pal?
How are you guys? Welcome back, Pete.
Thanks, John. Good to hear from you as always.
Yeah, man. And I know that Carson Wentz set out team drills for the 4th consecutive session, but was on the field doing some individual work. But today you had a little bit of goal line work, and that's always something you get a chance to see the offense go up against the defense.
Yeah, anytime you see a live period in today's NFL world, it tends to get kind of exciting. And we kind of mentioned Chip Kelly never did any live periods. So since Doug Pearson is back, generally 2 or 3 days. Today was one of them. And when they do goal line, it's always, you can hear the pads pop, and it makes you feel a little old school.
I know we talked about the running back situation yesterday. You got a little different dynamic with Darren Sproles instead of LeGarrette Blount. Now, LeGarrette Blount would typically be the guy on the goal line who would get those carries. Who's going to be the guy in that role this year?
Well, it's going to be interesting. I mean, Jay Ajayi, you would think, has the size. Today it was Corey Clement with the first team. He got the first play and kind of plunged in behind Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks on that right side, which is probably the best right side in football. On the second team, Wendell Smallwood did not have much luck at all. And then the third team was Josh Adams, and he's the undrafted rookie from Notre Dame, really big back, really powerful. He was able to plow it in, but that's obviously against third-team defense as well. He might be an option down the line after sort of a year on the practice squad because he's got some size and strength to him. There's no question about that. But you would imagine it would be between Ajayi and Corey Clement if you're trying to really punch the ball in. But as I always say, Doug Peterson likes to do some inventive things at the goal line, and sometimes that doesn't involve just putting your head down and trying to push people around. And that's why you can even envision 5'6" Darren Sproles in there.
Yeah, and Sproles is a guy that we talked a little bit yesterday about. Corey Clement had the big run in the Super Bowl, breaking some tackles. People forget that was a huge play in that Super Bowl, him breaking those tackles and setting up, right at the end of the half there. But, in fact, it set up the Philly, right? The Clement run?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and obviously he had a great Super Bowl. So, it's interesting how you fast forward, and this time last year, Corey was obviously undrafted. In any undrafted player, the odds are stacked against him. And he was just fighting for his life every day at practice, trying to improve. And now he's entrenched. He's a part of this team. He's not fighting for a roster spot or anything of that nature. He's a big part of this offense. It's amazing how far he has come so quickly.
We talk a lot about on the goal line, the running back and punching it in and how that gets done. But what about the Eagles' defense in that situation? They lost a couple of players. They have a different look on defense. But is this a team that you think is, I don't want to say specifically in goal line, but against the run, a better team?
Well, in a lot of ways, I think that depends how much you can get Haloti Ngata on the field. I mean, that guy is just impossible to move. But he is 34. He is coming off a season in Detroit where he played in just 5 games because of a biceps tear. So he's completely healthy. He did not practice today, however, but it was just a Veterans Day that sometimes you just give to an older guy to make sure they're healthy and on a pitch count, things of that nature. But he, as far as a 2-down player who just stops the run, that's the best the Eagles have had in years and years and years. I mean, this guy is one of the all-time great run stuffers. And look, I don't think he can be out there playing 40, 50 snaps a game consistently because of his age. But if you use him correctly and you use him in the right situations, he could be a very, very impactful player for this team.
John McMullen with us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline talking Eagles training camp. So, John, you talk about the fact that since they did goal line work and it actually resembles actual football, and that's a rarity, does that mean then that the bumps and bruises are starting to pile up?
Yeah, it was one of those days, and it didn't have a lot to do with the hitting aspect of it. It's just sort of sometimes guys get unlucky. It started with Greg Ward, who turned his ankle in individual drills, so he didn't even make it to team drills before he was in the medical tent. He had to get his ankle taped up. Matt Jones, who missed practice. With Doug is going all hockey on us with lower body injury. He tried to practice and immediately limped off and looked to me like he was favoring his groin. So that might be the problem there. Josh Sweat was probably the scariest situation because he was down and in pain, and it looked like his knee, and he's got that history of knee problems. It looks like the Eagles dodged a bullet. He sprained his ankle. That's what people are telling me. So it's not a huge injury. And also Richard Rodgers had to come off. He's the one who kind of got hit. Looked like a shoulder or a forearm. But, yeah, it's that time of camp where guys start to get some bumps and bruises, and you just hope – you see all the ACL injuries around the league, Jonathan Cyprien and Tennessee being the latest. That's the most positive part of this training camp. No significant serious injuries to this point.
Right, and there is good news about the wide receiver ranks are so deep, but there is good news about a wide receiver coming back.
Yeah, Bryce Treggs was the one guy coming back. He had not practiced yet this summer till today, so he came off the NFI list, and he was able to go for the first time. That's big for him because he's one of those back end of the roster receivers. So the fact is, if they keep 5 or if they keep 6, he's in the mix for that group, that 5th or 6th spot. And obviously you can't make the team if you're not practicing, can't make the club if you're in the tub, so to speak. So it's very big for him to get back on the field.
Talking with John McMullen, 7th day of Eagles training camp, plenty to get into here. And you wrote about Jim Schwartz, and you said he must have been listening to our show yesterday because you called for the rotating, Jones and Bosby. This time, Mills was the guy on the inside, something you suggested yesterday. And it's interesting because we had a listener text in who was listening to our conversation, and he said he doesn't know why we keep saying that Jones shouldn't be on the inside because so many teams now are moving better receivers to the inside, trying to go after weaknesses. So why would you not want maybe your better guy on the inside? But today they went with Mills.
Yeah, people don't listen, Mike. It was going to happen eventually. I think this is ultimately how it ends up because they want those 3 guys on the field together. And it makes the most sense. Just look around the league. Name any great cornerback. Where do they play? Jalen Ramsey, Patrick Peterson, Richard Sherman when he's healthy, Xavier Rhodes. Any of them play in the slot? No. If you're a number 1 quarterback in this league, you play outside the numbers. Why do you play outside the numbers? Because that's where Antonio Brown is. That's where Julio Jones is. That's where A.J. Green is. That's where the best players play. Now, that's not to say there aren't impactful slot players. You can point to people like Julian Edelman, but again, they're not Julio Jones. They're not A.J. Green. They're not Antonio Brown. They're very good players, and that's why the best cornerbacks are outside the numbers. That hasn't changed. That will never change, and that's why I said it doesn't make a lot of sense to have somebody with that talent. And by the way, he has no experience in what the slot position on defense is. It's a very intricate position. You need to understand run fits. You need to understand, sort of have the savvy. And that's why a veteran like Patrick Robinson had so much success. It never made a lot of sense to me. What Jim was trying to do, evidently, is get him some work to try to make him more versatile. But when it comes down to it, if he wants those 3 guys on the field, Mills or Darby is the one that's going to be in the slot.
Yeah, I just want to read off the text messages. I don't get why no one understands why Sidney Jones is playing as the nickel corner in camp. These teams are not playing by the quote-unquote rules anymore. They're not going to have their two best receivers lined up on the outside every single time. There's been reports that Odell Beckham is playing in the slot at training camp right now. You have Nelson Aguilar playing the slot, Jarvis Landry. The list goes on. These teams are looking for mismatches, and if you have a weak guy playing the nickel, teams are going to recognize it and expose it.
Well, they're always going to recognize if you have a weak player in the slot. But again, as I just pointed out, that's not to say, look, occasionally Jalen Ramsey, add Marcus Lattimore into that category. Again, these are all outside cornerbacks. They also travel. And when you're the best cornerbacks, occasionally they'll put a Julio Jones or an Odell Beckham Jr. inside in the slot trying to fool a team. But when you're talking percentage-wise, that's going to be well less than 10% of the time. So the guys who do travel means travel. They go all over the field. Wherever that particular receiver lines up, that's where they're going to go. But all of those guys, again, every single one of them, point to me a top cornerback in this league that doesn't play outside the numbers. That's what the Eagles believe Sidney Jones has the potential to be, and that's where he's going to end up.
John McMullen with us. John, I think a minute ago you mentioned the key word to my next question because you have an article up about Schwartz's engine is different but just as powerful. That's on our website on 97.3 ESPN.com. But I thought the key word that you said a minute ago is versatile or versatility. I mean, is that essentially what Jim Schwartz has boiled down to now, that he wants every guy cross-trained and versatility to be able to tinker and move, or has that always been the case?
Well, it is changing, and that's where that text message is a little bit on base, in that offenses are changing and defenses by nature have to respond, and they want versatile players. For instance, he's cross-training even Jordan Hicks a little bit, so he and Nigel Bradham can be sort of almost like a strong safety, free safety dynamic and switch at any time. We'll see if he gets that goal accomplished, but he's constantly using that word, versatility, versatility, versatility. Up front, it's Brandon Graham and Michael Bennett are the two most versatile. Obviously, Brandon's not practicing right now, but you're able to do a lot of things. And then Malcolm Jenkins is the key to it all because that guy plays everywhere. If you look at him last season, he played strong safety. He played free safety. He played essentially nickel linebacker. He played dime linebacker. He played slot cornerback. He even played on the outside. But again, when you look at the percentages, a guy like Malcolm plays maybe 4 or 5% of the snaps outside as a cornerback. That doesn't mean he's an outside cornerback. But what it does mean is you can surprise the other side. And the more players you can have that are sort of like Swiss Army knives, it makes you a better football team. And that's why it's so key for Jim Schwartz to find a nickel corner he's confident in and a third safety, because he wants to be able to move Malcolm Jenkins all over the field. And that's why I've been talking since the Eagles lost Patrick Robinson. It's a bigger setback than people think, because they assume that Sidney Jones is more talented and you can just put him in that slot and he's going to be better. It doesn't necessarily work that way. Patrick's really good at that particular position. And to expect a first-year, essentially a first-year player, played one game last year, to step in, even though he's more talented at a higher level than that, it's not going to happen.
John, you're right about Destiny Vaeao in that piece as well. How do you quantify or describe his progression through where he came from when he joined the organization to where he is now?
Well, he's another guy. He's sort of, I wouldn't say he's a big part of the projected rotation, but he is sort of gone from, much like Corey Clement, undrafted at one time 3 years ago. And now he's a part of this team. He's not a guy who's sort of fighting for a roster spot. And right now he's been taking all the first-team reps in place of where Tim Jernigan would normally be. So ultimately, I don't think it's going to end up that way. I think the Eagles are slowly ramping up Nada and making sure at his age he's ready to be the starter week one. But he'll be sort of that third interior guy, and that's where it's also important because Brandon Graham and Michael Bennett can move inside as well. So he's not going to get a ton of snaps, I don't think, when the real bullets start flying, but he's certainly a part of that line. He's certainly a part of this team.
John, I'm interested, we talk about the corners in that situation. You got a third-round pick in Russel Douglas, who you talked about, had one of the plays of the day today. I mean, he's a guy that was a pretty good player for them at times last year. I mean, they had to go to him with no intention of using him. They just kind of got forced into using him last year. You have a third-round pick. What kind of role do you anticipate a guy like Douglas having?
Well, you can never have enough cornerbacks in this league because of the way offenses are trending. They all have basically 11 personnel on the field, which is 3 receivers. A lot of times you'll see 4. A lot of the tight ends are now really just glorified receivers detached away from the formation, tight ends sort of in name only. So you need a lot of bodies. And obviously that's also a position that tends to really be a lot of injuries because you have a lot of those soft tissue things, hamstrings. You'll tweak a groin. So he's going to be a big part of this team. And you're right, he sort of got thrown into the fire last year when Ronald Darby got hurt. And it was ugly at times, but he also fought his way through it. And I think he showed a lot of the same traits that Jim Schwartz likes about Jalen Mills, who was in a similar situation his rookie season. And it was maybe even a little bit worse for Jalen because he was a 7th-round pick. And he kind of got thrown in there. And there were a lot of ugly moments. But what they both have is the best friend of any cornerback, and that's you understand you're going to get beat in this league. I mentioned some of the great receivers and some of the great cornerbacks, even the Lattimores and the Rhodeses and the Ramseys, they get beat on occasion too. So you know that's coming, but you have to have that cornerback mentality of forgetting about it, not letting it affect the next play. And I think that's what Russel has in common with Jalen Mills. He fought through it all. He's now in his second year. He understands the defense better. And he brings something different because he's a really, really big cornerback. And he's really physical. And I think he can get up and be that press coverage guy that could sort of give wide receivers fits if he continues to improve.
And, John, of course, you accurately know that there are a lot of eyes down here on Joe Callahan, the Holy Spirit grad, the Wellesley College grad that everybody hopes might find his way onto at least the practice squad. But as good as the day he had the other day when his touchdown pass ended practice, what took place today to end practice?
Yeah, today it was the exact opposite. You sort of get the feeling that Doug does this kind of on purpose. When there's a big play, he'll blow the whistle towards the end of practice and end it on a high note. Today it was the defense getting the best of the offense as a whole. It was Stephen Means getting the pressure and sacking Joe Callahan, and then Doug blew the whistle to end practice. Stephen Means is one of those guys who nobody knows, nobody understands, but he's such a big part of this team because there's not anybody, and I say it all the time, he's one of the best practice players I've ever seen because he brings energy every single day, and that's tough to do, especially this time of year when it's 80s, 85, 87, the humidity's 90%, it's miserable out, everybody's sort of going through it, Groundhog Day, same thing every single day, and somehow Stephen Means every single day just brings this incredible energy.
All right, John, day 7 in the books. A week from today, they will be on the field playing an actual preseason game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll have that game for you live on 97.3 ESPN. Any other things of note that happened today at practice?
Trying to think offhand. I mentioned all the injuries. Obviously, Carson, as you mentioned, wasn't in team drills. He did go off into a separate field and sort of worked on some sprints and things like that when they were in team drills. So I don't think anybody should be concerned by any point. And I would say that Mike Rowe even admitted, he's the new offensive coordinator, obviously. Even he admitted the defense got the better of the offense today.
All right, John, we'll check in on day number 8 tomorrow. And, of course, we'll have Eagles and Steelers coming up next week right here on 97.3. Thanks, pal.
Thank you, guys.